Welcome to our episode 7 of the Lay of the Land podcast from the Scottish Land Commission. I am your host, Calum Maclean. For this episode, I'm joined by the founder and landowner of the Belladrum Tartan Heart Festival and Belladrum Estate, Joe Gibbs. In this podcast, you'll hear all about the rich history of his family's land dating back to the 1800s, the fight to regain ownership, and how he turned this into one of Scotland's top music festivals. Welcome, please, Belladrum's very own Joe Gibbs. Well, Joe, the land at Belladrum has been in your family quite a long time, since 1857. Can you tell us a bit about your family history?
Yes, certainly. My family, as you say, came here in 1857. They were ironmasters from Glasgow. My great-great-grandfather and his father before him all worked in the coal and iron industry and eventually became Scotland's second largest ironmasters after the Baird family. And come the sort of mid-19th century, when they had made quite a fortune for themselves, they decided, like many people did then in Glasgow and other parts of central Scotland, to shake the dust of industry off their heels and make for the Highlands. And it was at a time when a large area of the Highlands changed hands, because some of the traditional landowners at that time were giving up. A whole new type of landowner came in.
And at some point, I think it was the 1970s, a Dutch company bought the land, or at least bought some of it. And I understand that you made it your mission to buy it back. Why was that?
Yes, what happened was my family, for one reason or another, had to sell up Belladrum. Belladrum was not a sporting estate. It was a farm. It was a 5,000-acre farm with a lot of hill ground, and then some in-by, and crofts and tenant farmers, and the sort of usual makeup of what was then a traditional Highland estate. And that was the estate that I knew until I was 21, when it was sold. And I had always been in line to inherit it and was prepared to do that. And so it all came as a bit of a shock when that happened. But it had to happen at that time, and that was just one of those things. And but I did make it my mission at the time, because I loved it very much as a place, to try whatever I could to reacquire it. And the purchasers of the land were Dutch and Danish purchasers anyway, at a time when these guys in the 1970s were buying a lot of land and a lot of estates in the Highlands, and were then asset stripping them. They were selling them off bit by bit, having bought them as a whole, and making a lot of money by doing that. And so that's what happened to Belladrum, and it was very sad, because when it was actually my grandmother who had to deal with it. When she had been assured by the buyers that the farm, the forestry would continue. And in those days, we had a forestry team working here, as well as lots of people on the farm, and that they would continue working. And then, as soon as the ink was dry on the contract, on the title, she was told that actually that wasn't the case, and it was going to be split up. So I remember her vividly going around with tears in her eyes, having to tell all the people who worked here, who we obviously knew very well, that their jobs no longer existed, very sadly. And that was a very bad moment for us all. Anyway, my parents found themselves signing the titles off kind of back to back, so that they could see vividly, how much individual plots and items were being sold off for, and they could see, what these guys were making in terms of cash out of the whole thing. But that was the way it was. There was no point in trying out a spilt milk. We kept a couple of cottages and a little bit of land, so that we kept in touch. And I decided, that I would abide my time, but I would absolutely try and get back to Belladrum. And luckily, in that period, I married a girl from Fife who wasn't too far away from the Highlands, and therefore might be happy to move there. And turned out she was. And after 10 years, in 1987, I just got the feeling that the lady who bought the house, Foynes House, that we live in now, and was the house that we ended up living in, my grandfather having pulled down the large house at Belladrum after the war because it was too big, much as he loved it. He felt it was too big to be, it needed a lot of people to look after it, and the gardens too. The lady who lived in Foynes in 1987, I just had a feeling, I used to keep in touch with her, I just had a feeling that she was slightly restive. So I wrote to her, and she replied that yes, she was thinking of moving, and she'd be very happy to sell the house back to the family off the market, which was extremely good of her. And so we, without kind of expecting to, in a way, we suddenly found ourselves with a foot back in the door at Belladrum. As so often happens in life, what you think is perhaps an ill fortune in terms of the estate being asset stripped turned out to have a silver lining, because there was no way that we would ever be able to have repurchased 5,000 acres of the Highlands of the house and cottages and all the farms and everything that was part of it. But the fact that the Dutch and Danes had asset stripped it meant that one could buy back just what one needed if it became available in bite-sized chunks. And as one continued to work and make the funds to do that too. And so gradually, over a period of 10 years from 1987 and about 8 different transactions, we reassembled around the house the core of what was the estate. So that was the forestry and some of the forestry and the farm and the Italian gardens that had belonged to the old house, and various strips and bits that kind of worked in with all of that, like a jigsaw puzzle. And that was that. We really felt that, once we'd done that, that there was no need to it anymore. That was a viable unit in itself. And, a lot of the other things had changed. When we sold Belladrum, one of the good things that came out of it was that the tenant farmers who were tenants of Belladrum at that time and the crofters pretty much all got an opportunity to buy their farms and their crofts at very good prices. So that was a plus that came out of it. That formed a fair part of the ground. So there wasn't really much left other than the old hill ground, which had then been planted with disastrous species of lodgepole pine, which we didn't want at all. So we were very, very happy with how it turned out in the end. And one has to say that perhaps if I had just inherited it, like many, many people do, their farms and their estates, I might not have appreciated it as much as I did when I had to fight to get back what I really loved. And so in a way, it's all turned out for the best.
And it's probably best known now, of course, for the music festival. How did the idea for Belladrum come about in the first place? Was it yourself that came up with it?
Yes. What happened was as I said earlier, my grandfather had to pull down Belladrum House because it was just too big, and he offered it to schools and hospitals and people like that. But in the 1950s, so this was about 1955, in that era, so many other houses were being offered to people. So many other houses were coming down. The house had been an old Highland house in the sort of mid-19th century, built in the 18th century. And it had then been built around in that Victorian way, which had added to its size enormously. And I think the built around house lasted almost exactly 100 years, and that was it. You know, that enormous edifice had to come down again. And that happened with so many other houses around here, like Usican and places like that. It was quite a common thing. Anyway, that house had attached to it some beautiful Italianate gardens, which descended in terraces to a big apron at the bottom. And that area has become familiar now to many thousands of people as the main stage at Belladrum. What happened was that was one of the areas that we repurchased, and it had a lovely sort of stone masonry, as people will know who've been there, and two gazebos and these terraces and everything. But at the time that we repurchased it, very little had happened to it for 30 or 40 years. And it was, I remember it in my youth, actually, it was used by the guy who was the sort of carpenter on the estate. He bred trout there, you know, it'd been sort of used for things like that. But on the whole, it had gone to rack and ruin. It was full of birch and alder, which were then slowly pulling down all the masonry. And we thought, well, it's a shame to lose it altogether. But, you know, what are we going to do with it? Because it's going to be costly to reclaim it. And so I had spent part of my youth, at the time I thought my misspent youth, going to festivals. There weren't very many then, sort of Glastonbury and that kind of thing, you know, there weren't many others, Reading. But there were almost none in Scotland, I think, virtually none. I think there were none actually at that time, in the mid to late 70s. And I love festivals, you know, and I thought, well, you know, let's give it a try. And as they say, fools walk in where angels fear to tread. And if I'd known what I'd known a few years later, I probably wouldn't have done it. But we did. And once it got going, it was difficult to stop the momentum. And that's really how it began.
I mean, I have been myself. It's a great festival. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but quite a number of years ago, I was working in a different job, and I couldn't get the weekend off to go to Belladrum. But I went anyway. And I think I called in sick from like one of the Portaloos, pretending I was ill in my bed at home. But so I know the kind of the draw it's got, especially around the local area. A huge number of people. I lived in Inverness and went. But what did the local community just around where you are? What did they initially think about this music festival?
I think to begin with, there was quite a lot of the people who live on Belladrum now are retired, and I think not surprisingly and very understandably, there was a degree of reservation about the idea to begin with. Because, and not actually just amongst people who lived here, but also with the Highland Council and people like that, because there hadn't been a festival in the Highlands, and people perhaps associate festivals with, you know, things like Altamont with gangs of Hell's Angels sort of murdering people and that kind of thing, you know. And obviously they'd moved on a lot by then, but the people didn't necessarily know that. So there were worries, and it took some years for it to bed in from a local point of view, I think. And there are probably, I'm sure there are still people who would rather it didn't happen. But on the whole, over the years, people who actually live on Belladrum, many of them, I think, came to enjoy it, to accept free tickets to it, to bring their families to it, and all that kind of thing. And it all became they became part of the sort of community enjoyment of it. and it's always been a family event. When I went to Glastonbury in '79 first, I was very impressed by how it was the first year they'd introduced having children at Glastonbury. I was very impressed at how that changed the atmosphere of the event from what one was used to normally at events like that. It made it a lot more settled, a lot less wild. And kids just had that kind of effect on it, And so we always intended to have a family event here. And right from the start it was. And I think that helped, actually. But the rest of the community have always played a big part in it, whether it's the immediate community, for instance, the Hall Committee the Hall Committee in Kiltality, right from year one, have had a stand right at the sort of fulcrum of the event, at the top of the main stage, where they do wonderful teas, cakes, and that kind of thing. And it's very popular, and it raises lots of money for the hall. We've always had a great relationship with Love at Shinty. There's always been a big tie-up there. And in lots of other ways, lots and lots of local people have been involved. In terms of the wider Highland community, again, there's been a massive involvement. The audience is about 60% Highland, and 40% of the other 40%, they're mainly from the rest of Scotland. And the accent has always been on trying to use as much local resource as possible for the event, and to promote local talent as well, and to support local charities. So over the years, the event has either had great local charities like Archie and the Highland Hospice and things like that, but the Highland Hospice was our first sort of lead charity, as our sort of associated charities. Plus, it's given huge numbers of tickets to lots and lots and lots, or a huge range of local charities to use for fundraising purposes. So it's always been heavily involved in the Highland voluntary sector too.
And as the festival's evolved and grown over the years, how important is it to have that input from these local groups and have them benefit from it too?
Well, it's part of. I mean, a festival is nothing without its audience, and the Highland audience couldn't be a better audience. Highlanders are naturally very welcoming, love a party, and so there's never been any trouble in getting local people involved. And yes, as the size has got bigger, so has the amount of interaction between the community and the event. And local schools have become involved in things like environmental projects, and there have been countless ways that people have become involved in it. And of course, a lot of local artists, bands, and actual installation artists and people like that have become involved. And well, for a lot of them, it's been their first experience of playing to a festival audience. And from that, they've gone on to much greater things. They've started playing at other festivals, and they've grown their presence and their talent. The other thing that it's done actually is it employs partly a workforce. I mean, I actually should say at this point that I sold the festival in 2019, having run it for 15 years, because festivals are risky things, and I'd sort of had enough of taking the risk of it really over that period. And also I felt, I'm 65, and I thought it was time that a younger team ran it. And your energy at 65 is not the same as when you were 50. But over those 15 years that I've been running it, we had built up an incredible core team of people working on it. Some of them working all year round, and then an enormous temporary team that came in every year that kind of moved from, between different festivals and came to Belladrum. And one of the most sort of satisfying aspects of the whole thing was that a lot of these guys who worked on it were incredibly talented and grew their talents with Belladrum and then exported them to other events throughout the United Kingdom. And it was really good to see that, actually. And they were, the Highlands has produced some very, very good people who still work in what's left after COVID of the festival industry. Hopefully it will all regenerate.
As part of the festival itself, when you ran it, and as part of the communications around it, and I guess telling people about it, was the history of the land and the history of Belladrum, is that something you celebrate and you tell people about? Is that something you think is important that people should know?
Yes, I mean, I think it is. Although, and in the early years, particularly of the festival, we related the history, and I used to do a sort of panel session quite often in the spoken word tent, and that was quite often a subject that came up then. And I found, over the years walking through the festival, you obviously meet a lot of people, and very often they asked you about that kind of thing. And so it was great to tell them. Maybe it's not the sort of thing that you want to ram down to people's throats too much, because they may not be remotely interested in your boring old family and their history, and how they, what they're doing on the land. But if they were interested, I'm very happy to tell them.
It struck me earlier, you said that when you were talking about the companies that bought the land and started to asset strip it, and then, you felt like you had maybe a connection to the place. How important is it that people care about the land they're on and how it's used? And I guess starting a festival would never have happened under the rule of these companies.
No, I think it is very, very important. I mean, I think that obviously with the ownership of land come responsibilities, and one of the main responsibilities you feel is to hand on the land, not just in the sense of the farming land, but in the sense of the sort of generality of the land in the community and its place in the community, in an enhanced state from when you acquired it or inherited it or whatever, because it's a finite resource, and it's a big responsibility. And as we know, or we are more and more aware, it plays a significant part in the ecology of the planet, and it therefore bears a responsibility to help with the carbon footprint and all that side of things as well. It was something we were very aware of at the festival, actually. That too, we encouraged a lot of environmental initiatives, one of which actually was interesting. It was a thing called the Clean Fields initiative, where people were just encouraged to take away their rubbish, not to leave a single speck of rubbish. And it grew from one quite small area into now quite a big area where people leave it absolutely spotless. And that was very rewarding. You ask people to love the farm, to look after it, and they do if you ask them to do that. We also had car share schemes and all kinds of things like that as well. But in terms of the actual land itself, we have joined a local cluster of landowners of all different sizes, from crofters to small farmers to small estates like us to big estates in the locality, who form the West Loch Ness farm cluster. And the idea behind that is that we all feel the same way about wanting to leave a legacy of improved environmental and improved role in the community and all that. And so we're getting together to form a cooperative to do that and learn from each other's experiences, and to have a connected form of environmental enhancement, so that it's not just islands, the whole of the area, which I think is probably about 10,000 acres it covers altogether, basically from Belladrum towards Loch Ness and towards Inverness. And that's just got underway, but it's quite an exciting thing. We'll all be doing carbon audits, and we'll all be looking at how we can how we can enhance key species of flora and fauna and birds.
Oh, so is that the key aim then, to look at carbon issues and also to look at biodiversity?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, that is the point of it. That is the whole point of the cluster. And but obviously the point behind that is to look after the land that we live on.
How do you think we get more people interested in the land and land issues? I'm thinking about everyone in the community, not just the landowners themselves, but people that would come to your festival but might not own even a croft.
Well, it's a vexed issue, that. I actually think that I guess it's going to sound a bit controversial, but I actually think that since the institution of the Scottish Parliament in 1999-2000, that land has actually been put very much at the forefront of that Parliament's agenda, both under Labour and the Scottish Nationalists and the Greens, and has received, one might almost say, more attention than it was due, because you can't. I mean, landowners from a sort of voting point of view are quite a soft target. There are not very many of them. They're seen as being privileged and whatever, and there's the whole history of the clearances and everything going back, so they don't have the best rep in terms of history, however good they are now and however much improved they are now. And it seems, as somebody who owns land, that it's been very much at the forefront, and there have been a lot of measures, many of which have been very good. And I think, I was particularly in favour of the open access measures. I also think that the encouragement of communities to own their land is a very good thing. I don't think it's a panacea for the whole of the Highlands, but I think that where there is a will and people want to do that, and there's a willing seller, willing buyer, I think it's a great thing that communities can do that. I think there has been an enhanced interest in the land. 70% of people in Scotland live in urban areas. That's no reason why they shouldn't be interested in the land. In fact, they might be more interested in the land because they get out of the urban areas and they want to go and walk in it, and perhaps some of them would rather live in it.
I think the focus as well could be expanded to look at a lot of urban areas and how land is used there.
Yes.
In cities, a lot of disused land. So I think if that was our focus going ahead, and obviously, as soon as you say land reform, people think of maybe remote or rural or highland places, but the focus can be also on urban land, how that's used, getting disused land back into use, that benefits communities.
I agree. I mean, that's all fantastic. And I really genuinely do think that local communities getting involved in land ownership is a wonderful thing. Having been a journalist myself and written on some country issues for some publications, I've looked at the crofting issue and I fail to understand why there continues to be such a problem to have so many uninhabited crofts and unused crofts on one hand, and on the other hand, so many young people wanting to be on the land on the other hand. So, I think, there was a big problem when crofts became, in a sense, they were commoditized by being able to be assigned to anyone, which then turned them into a tradable asset, in effect. And I'm not sure how sensible that was in retrospect, although one can see why it was done. But crofts are, people talk about making more land available to people. Well, that's fine, but what about doing something with the crofting land that already exists first? And that, I think that would engage people. I think those people who are already engaged in the land but frustrated because they can't get there onto the land and they see all these empty crofts, that would be a great move.
You're someone that lives on the land and saw that there could be a festival, decided to go ahead and do it. Yeah, would it not make more sense that people, who live in places with absentee landlords would maybe have the power to make the decisions themselves about hey, we've got this piece of land, we could use it if we owned it and had the power to do that?
I mean, my understanding of landowners is that if somebody comes up with a great idea from the community for something to be done, and it looks like a winner, then they're going to be, I would have thought, quite happy to do it. And if they're not, well, I don't suppose there's much the community can do about that. But I mean, I don't have any instances where that's happened. Perhaps you do, but I'm not aware of any. I do think that sorry to interrupt. I do think that I think the government's move towards encouraging landowners to consult more with their communities is sensible there. But the sort of general timbre, the tenor of the age is one of suggesting that they're just a sort of privileged lot who don't really care about the all that the future and everything. It's not true.
I'm interested also in the West Loch Ness group you brought up there. What would be the ongoing aims for that now over the short term and then the longer term?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're collecting data using naturalists and trained naturalists and people to collect the data on what species we have now, and then we're identifying on across the whole area, and then it will then hopefully become apparent what species are, what particular species are present in less than the ideal amounts. So that might be some types of butterflies, or it might be hares, or it might be particular orchids, or it might be there's quite a range of things, or barn owls, or something like that. So once we've identified those, then we identify how do we go about encouraging these species to come back? And I think once we've got ourselves sorted out on that front and everything, I think the longer term plan is to encourage some community involvement.
Since you sold Belladrum, do you have still an input in that yourself? Do you get involved? Can you kind of steer how it looks in future? Do you have any kind of input or control now?
No, I don't. I hope that it will maintain the same ethos that it's always had, because the team who worked with me on it are still in place. So the new owners have kept the local people who worked on the event very largely in place, and they obviously are. They know what the ethos is. So. But I think it would be wrong for me to be meddling in it. Having done my stint, I think you can't sort of try and rule from the grave. I think it's better that they get on and do their own thing, especially as the risk is theirs now, and it must be their decision.
You're talking about the team that are involved, but you're also talking about these musicians who maybe got their first opportunity at Belladrum. Was it always part of your aim that people would, start at Belladrum and then get the opportunity to progress and continue and even take it over as you have sold it? Was that always part of the aim when you started it?
To be absolutely honest, it wasn't. Not because it wasn't something that I would love to have happened, but because when we started it, I didn't know anything about running festivals at all. I mean, I just, was completely ignorant about it. And I had no idea whether it would ever grow into anything worthwhile or not. It lost money hand over fist for the first 5 years, and it was terrifying. And so, whether it had a future or not was very unclear. So, I couldn't. If I'd had a crystal ball, I would have. Yeah, but no, it was just the way it turned out. And then after, when it became established, sort of after 7 years, well, then one began to think like that. You could start to think like that.
You've obviously learned a few the lessons, maybe the hard way, and
Yeah.
You learn through experience and, I guess, making mistakes. What advice would you have for a community that wanted to start their own festival on a piece of land? What would you tell them?
I would say to them, good on you. You're brave, but I hope it succeeds for you. And there are some very good examples of community-run festivals like Doon the Rabbit Hole, for instance, which I think is a sort of not-for-profit community-run one. And so, there's a good, they can succeed. I would say that be careful not to just look on it as an indulgence for your own musical tastes and preferences. You have to think of it from the beginning as, in a commercial sense. You have to, what is going to appeal to your audience, not what appeals to me. And be prepared for and be funded for an initial period of losses, because the chances are you're going to incur them.
Do you think it's important as well that you make that connection to a local community? There have been other festivals in the Highlands, round Inverness. There were some other big festivals that, were successful for a smaller number of years, but didn't continue on. Is it really important that you engage people locally?
Very much so. I think you're possibly thinking of Rockness, are you, and things like that. Yeah, well, I was involved in Rockness, and one of the partners in it, we started it, and then after 2 years, an American company bought into it. And they also bought into it control of it. And one of the reasons why that event didn't continue, we always felt as the local partners, was because their attitude was to parachute in this sort of, enormous kind of rock circus. But the actual links to the local community were rather superficial and not hugely existent, really.
Final question for you. What's your best memory of Belladrum?
The best memory, my best memories are of the always the last night, the Saturday night of Belladrum. And we always have the British Legion, Inverness British Legion pipe band all come on stage after the main act has finished. And they, together with Kenny Smith and his band Torridon, and they play something like Caledonia, or they play Loch Lomond, or they play something like that, and the pipers join in, sometimes by then a little bit worse for wear. And all the rock stars and everyone's gone, and it's just the great audience there, the fantastic Belladrum audience there in the Italian Gardens. They're all lit up, and these local guys on stage singing the sort of the final music of the festival and playing it. And it's intensely moving experience, seeing it both from the stage and from the terraces. And that, I think, is seminal experience and really kind of sums up what the festival is about, which is about local people getting together and having a fantastic party as a community. So
this year you'll attend Belladrum just as a fan, as a punter, as someone enjoying the music.
I mean, I can't tell you how wonderful that'll be. I mean, normally I spend it in a porta cabin, firefighting and fielding the problems, which have been legion. But over the years, but hopefully people don't notice too much. But no, this year, but you have a drink.
Excellent. Enjoy.
Thank you.
So that's it for episode 7 of the Lay of the Land podcast. Thank you so much to Joe for sharing their incredible story. As Joe said, fools walk in where angels fear to tread. But I'm sure you'll agree that a huge community across Scotland is grateful for his risks he took for both the land and the Scottish music scene for the past 35 years. The Belladrum Tartan Heart Festival will take place from the 28th to the 30th of July this year. Head online to find out more. If you would like more information about how you might get involved in the way land is owned and used in your area, visit myland.scot for stories, news and case studies for what's happening with the land around you. Join us for the next episode soon.